Welcome to this episode of D2C Marketing Brains. My name is Moritz, I'm the host of the show, and today I'm going to do a solo episode talking about one of my favorite topics, which is the attribution and incrementality that's needed for D2C growth. So in order to scale your D2C and achieve growth, you need to understand where your sales are actually coming from. Which of your marketing activities are actually driving your sales? You want to find the truth about each channel contribution. So like you're investing €1,000 into this channel, what's the actual outcome of that? And why that's important is that if you find out which channel is contributing how much, you can invest more in the channels that are actually driving growth and focus less on channels that have a less impact. And if you do that, you'll of course achieve more growth and also faster. So it's really crucial to achieve growth that you have a good understanding of your channel's impact. So let's unpack the two critical elements here, which is attribution and incrementality. Attribution is basically distributing the credit for your sales to your different marketing activities. So let's say you 100 people buy from you every day, and then it would basically be that you distribute some of those sales, let's say 20 to, for example, Meta, and another 20 to Google, and maybe 20 sales come because people already know about you, they have bought your products before. And then you have an influencer campaign that's also driving 10 sales. So it's basically you take all the sum of your sales for the day and you break them down and you kind of distribute them towards your marketing activity so that you know, okay, this channel drove that many sales and this other channel drove another amount of sales. And then you also calculate how much you invested in that channel on that day or in that specific period. It's usually also better to look at longer periods because it can fluctuate day by day and the impact might be on a longer scale. Another really important concept in this topic is the concept of incrementality. That's been a buzzword for the last years. And what it actually means is that some of your sales would have happened anyway without you doing any marketing. So you make 100 sales and let's say 30 are not influenced by what you've done this week or last week in your marketing. Even if you stopped marketing completely, some of your sales would probably still have happened because people know you from before or they've heard about you from their friends, which you don't really impact that much. So the concept of incrementality means how many additional sales have happened through your marketing activity. So let's say you run Meta ads, you invest €500 into Meta ads, and from your attribution, you see that you make 20 sales. But the question is how many incremental conversions, how many incremental sales have you done because of your Meta investment? So if you wouldn't have invested into Meta ads, how many less sales would you have had? This sounds kind of easy enough in theory, right? But in practice, it's actually quite hard to come by. It's not so easy to actually see the incremental contribution that your channels are doing. And in the following, we're going to go through how to actually find that out and which kind of data sources you should look at and rely on to make those judgments of like, okay, my Meta investment gave me this many incremental sales. So let's look at how to actually go about this. You know that you have quite many data sources actually that you can look at and that you can consult on how much sales the channel has contributed. We're going to dive into the details of each of those data sources and what's the pros and the cons of that. And then in the end, we're going to look at how to actually evaluate your channels in the best way so that you have the best kind of picture It's never going to be the full truth, but you can try to come as close as you can to the truth of the incremental impact of each channel. So the first data source that you have is the in-platform tracking. So that would be your Meta pixel and your Google Ads pixel. Basically, these platforms where you invest money and you drive campaigns, they have their own tracking pixel that you install on your website. And that pixel is going to record basically, okay, we displayed an ad to that person and that person ended up buying later on. They're going to track that. And this way you can evaluate your campaigns, so, or the channel as a whole. So you can say, okay, we invested 500 euros into Meta and the Meta pixel tracked 20 purchases. They're even going to distribute it among the different campaigns. So campaign A drove 10 and campaign B drove 10 as well. That's a decent start, and the ad platforms are actually also going to optimize on that data. So that's kind of the data that they rely on. If they see that that person that you showed the ad to ended up buying, they're trying to find more of those people so that they can show the ads to similar people that also might end up buying. So they actually use that data. It's quite important to optimize your campaigns. What's the big problem with this kind of tracking is that it's very siloed. So Meta, for example, the Meta pixel is going to look at, okay, I showed this ad to that person and that person ended up buying. What they don't see is how many other touch points or which other touch points that person might have had as well. So for example, if Meta shows an ad to a person and the person ends up buying, it might be that that person has seen, for example, an influencer post before, that that person has done some research on Google and, been on your website. But Meta doesn't see any of that. Meta will say, I showed this ad to that person ended up buying, I get 100% of the credit for that sale. You see why that's problematic? Because customer journeys are very complex. There are not thousands maybe, but many touch points. And each of those touch points has a certain value to make someone buy your products. How much value is the other question. We're going to come to that later. But first of all, let's just establish that the in-platform tracking is fine, but it's not enough to evaluate your sales or evaluate the contribution of that channel because it just misses all the other touch points. The next data source that you have is your Google Analytics, GA4, and also your Shopify tracking. Those are not looking at your performance siloed, but they're actually looking at if someone comes to a website, where did they come from? So they're tracking from which platform, for example, from Meta or from Google Ads, that person came from. And then they're using that information to say, okay, this purchase came from a Meta ad. And they're even going to look at several touch points. So they can track that, okay, last week you clicked on the Meta ads and yesterday you came from a Google ad and then you made a purchase. And then depending on the attribution model that you choose, they're actually going to say, or they're going to distribute the credit of that sale towards the different touch points before. So we can say that that's already a step forward because we're looking at not only at one touch point or at one channel, we're looking at many touch points together. But the big problem with that is that these tools tend to be quite, let's say, last click focused. So the last touch points in the customer journey are getting a lot of credit. And that's because of the nature of how those tools operate. They are tracking your website visitors' behavior. But it's just nowadays, customer journeys are super complex and not all the touch points can be tracked properly. You have, first of all, you have the issue of people denying being tracked on your website. So if they decline the cookies, you have ad blockers as well. which basically means that you won't, or Google Analytics and Shopify won't see where those people came from. And that means that not all of the sales are going to be distributed or tracked even. Another problem with that kind of tracking is that customer journeys, as I said, are really complex. And, we switch from different devices. We might, see a meta ad on our phone. We might click to the website. We might check it out. And then a day later or next weekend, you're remembering, oh yeah, I wanted to check that out. You go from your laptop and go to the website and you make a purchase. It's not sometimes these kind of touch points can be linked together, but it's very tricky, as you can imagine. So it's not 100% tracking everything correctly. So the nature of the complex customer journeys are a real challenge for those tracking tools. And lastly, not all touch points are clicks that end up on your website, right? So we have, first of all, that people might just see your ads on Meta, but they don't click. So it might actually be that they watched the full video and it made them much more likely to buy your products, but they didn't click. So GA4 and Shopify will never know about this. And then later on, they come to your website directly or through a Google ad or another channel. And then Google will only track that. And then you say, oh, they only had that one touch point. So they don't see the full picture because not everything is click-based. Same with, for example, recommendations from friends, or if people, see your products in a store or something, that's all kind of touch points with your brands that are not click-based, and thus they're not going into that kind of attribution from GA4 and Shopify tracking. So all in all, these kind of trackings are better than the siloed in-platform tracking, but they're not perfect and usually not enough to actually evaluate your sales by, especially because they put much more emphasis and credit towards the last touch points of the journey, because they're usually the ones that can be tracked more easily, and less so on the discovery touch points or touch points that are even outside of online, that are very hard to track on the individual user basis. The next data source you have are tools like your post-purchase survey or surveys in general. So more of a qualitative insight, a qualitative tracking, where, for example, for the post-purchase survey, you ask people after they done the purchase on your website, you ask them, how did you hear about us? And you list your different kind of channels, meta ads, or organic social profile, influencers, word of mouth. And you can then analyze how many % of people have answered in which way. So, for example, your GA4 will show you that 20% of your sales came from Google Ads, and then you will compare that to the post-purchase survey. How many people did actually come, or how many people say in the post-purchase survey that they actually came through Google to buy from a website? Typically, what you see is that channels like Meta and influencers get kind of little credit in GA4 because it's kind of that the kind of a bit harder to track touch point. And in the post-purchase survey, those channels are actually going to be of bigger importance. So, for example, in GA4, you might see that 10% of your purchases come from Meta, but in the post-purchase survey, 20% might answer that they know you from your meta ads. So that's a really important qualitative data source that you should always look at and incorporate as well into your evaluation of how incremental the impact of your channels are. The next data source are what I'm going to call third-party attribution tools, which basically operate quite similar to GA4, where they have a pixel on your website and they are tracking, the different touch points of people and then distribute credits to those touch points. What's different with those tools is that they can incorporate more data into their attribution model. So when they distribute credit for sales, they're not only looking at the, tracked touch points that they can see. So for example, someone clicked on a Meta ad, someone clicked on a Google Ads ad, and then they came from an influencer post and purchased. They can also incorporate more data, for example, your post-purchase survey data. So they're going to incorporate that into the attribution. And they can also modify their attribution model to reflect kind of the nature of a channel. So for example, Google branded search. So if someone searches for your brand on Google, comes to your website and buys, typically those people have had other touch points before because they must know your brand from somewhere, right? So these attribution tools, they can kind of tone down the importance of the Google branded search touch point. And thus the Google branded search will get less credit. In GA4, that's not really done. It's like, okay, someone had the touch point of Google branded search. Google branded search gets a lot of credit for that. But those tools can actually say, you know what, this touch point is actually not so important usually. So we're going to tone down the importance of that. And those things together make those tools a lot better than GA4 tracking because they incorporate more data and they come closer to the truth of distributing credit for your sales. Each of those third-party attribution tools works a bit different. There's nuances, and there's also lots of options out there, actually. I personally have worked with Triple Whale, which is a quite famous and common tool to use. But also I worked with Phospha, which was also incorporated different data than Triple Whale. The tool Phospha, for example, is also incorporating your impression data from your social channels, for example, into the attribution model. So they're going to look at how many impressions you actually have had. So not click-based, which I think is great, and really gives more credit to the impression-based channels like social and influencers as well to distribute credit for your sales. So that was a really interesting tool to use. And right now at Outsum, we are working with the tool Clar, and they are working more similar to Triple Whale, where they have a pixel on your website, and there we also incorporate the post-purchase survey data, and they have quite advanced machine learning models. And yeah, the tool is super useful, and I really like to work with it. And in general, those third-party tools I would definitely recommend companies to use them, and many companies do, because of the shortcomings of the aforementioned tracking methods. So these tools kind of mitigate those a little bit. They're not perfect either. We're going to come to that in a second. But definitely a step in the right direction, and definitely worth the investment so that you can evaluate your channels more realistically and come closer to the truth than with the more traditional tracking of GA4 or Shopify tracking. The shortcomings I see with these third-party tools is their lack of judging the incrementality. They do look at, which touch points a channel had. They also tone down the importance of certain touch points like branded search, and in some attribution models, even direct. So people come to a website directly. That credit gets distributed to the other channels as well, because people who come to a website directly, they must have known you from somewhere before, right? But they're not looking at how many of those sales are actually incremental, how much of your investment actually cost additional sales. They're just reporting on, okay, this channel drove, or this channel had a touch point in that conversion, so that channel will get some sort of credit, even though that touch point might not have been incremental. So for example, someone who already wants to buy from you, and then in the last second they see a meta ad and they click on it and they buy. That last click might not have actually made them buy. They've already decided before. They just happened to see the ad. And that's even more true for Google Ads usually, because people might not know how to, spell your brand, or don't know your domain. So they actually Google for your brand name, and then they click on a Google Shopping ad or a search ad. And that click is tracked, but it actually didn't drive their decision to make a purchase. So it shouldn't get credit. But it's really hard to make that judgment, basically. It's possible. We're going to come to that in a second. But those third-party tools usually don't do that. The last set of tools you can use for your attribution and incrementality evaluations of your marketing channels are marketing mix models. They've been around for quite a while, and in recent years, they actually have become a lot more accessible and a lot more easy to use, even for smaller brands or, if you're not a data scientist. So these tools are extremely interesting and helpful. How they work is that they don't rely on any tracking at all. So they're not looking at, where did the person come from to your website. They're looking at aggregate data and at marketing spends. So they're looking at how much have you invested into each channel on each day on over a longer period, for example, last month. And they're going to look at your overall sales. So they look at very aggregate data, not on user level at all. And what's the thinking behind that is that the tool basically looks at your spend levels for each channel over a longer period. Usually you need like 2 years of data. And then the tool also looks at, how have you changed your spend levels? Have you invested more in meta ads, less in influencers, more in Google ads, less in influencers? And looks at how your overall sales have developed over that period of time. And they use lots of data points from the past. So they're trying to model, okay, if you have this amount of investment into a certain channel, how much impact does that have on your sale? What's super interesting, I think, is, for example, if you invest usually 20,000 per month in meta ads, and then you drop that to 10,000, or you increase it to 30,000, how does that change your sales? Do you see an impact on your sales, or are the sales actually flat? If the sales would be flat, that would tell the marketing mix model that, hey, this channel is actually not that incremental. The sales happen no matter if you invest 10, 20, or 30,000 into that channel. That's a bit simplified explanation of how those tools work, but I think it helps to understand and to see the value of that as well. And there's, again, tons of different tools and approaches, so the devil is in the details as well. But what the tools also do is that they not only look at the spend for the whole channel, so for example, only the whole of Meta or the whole of influencer, but they also look at each kind of campaign. Or so if you invested, 10,000 in that influencer or 5,000 in another, then the tool will also kind of give credit for each of the campaign individually. I think those tools are very important and super interesting, though they have a few downsides as well. One of them being that it is still a bit complicated and tricky, and to like set them up properly, to make them work, to produce meaningful results, you need to map all of your spends correctly, and as I said, need lots of data. You need to be able to understand the data. It works with statistical modeling, so you need to have some basic understanding of the statistics behind it as well. As I said before, it's getting easier and easier, so that makes it more accessible, but it's still not as straightforward and needs some expertise to actually evaluate the data properly. And another big downside of the marketing mix models are that they're not looking at the details of the campaign. So say, for instance, that from one month to the other, you change your creative approach. Before, you have only run static ads, and now you hire a videographer and you make great ads, video ads that really address the target audience much better than a static ad can. Static ads can also do that, but let's just say that you upgrade your meta ads, right? So you make a lot better meta ads. The tool will not really see that. The tool will just see you kind of spend the same, and your sales might go up because of your better ads. You can better communicate the value to people, but the tool will not really see that. And it will kind of judge the current month with the better creatives similar to the previous months, because it doesn't look at the specific details. So I think that's a big downside of the tool, and that's why it also cannot be used individually, and has to be used in combination with other tools or data sources that we talked about before. And the very last tool in your stack to evaluate your attribution and incrementality are the incrementality tests. Incrementality tests try to answer the holy grail of how much actual additional value did the channel drive. So not just was there a touch point, but was that touch point meaningful? Did that touch point have an effect on people's buying behavior or buying decision? And as I said before, it's pretty hard to come by. And it's also nothing that you do on a daily basis, really. It's more that you run tests for a specific period and analyze the incrementality of a channel. There are actually 3 different ways to do those tests. The first one are the in-platform incrementality tests. So especially on Google Ads and on Meta Ads, they offer a tool to actually test that. So you can set up your incrementality test, and what the platform will do, that they create a control group which will be excluded from seeing your ads. So they look at, okay, this is your potential target audience. Those people are eligible to see your ads right now. They're going to exclude a certain amount, let's say 10 to 30% usually, of your target audience, and they're going to make sure that they're not going to see your ads. Then you run your ads like you normally do, and then Meta will compare those 2 groups. So the people that are eligible to see your ads, how many sales does Meta record from those people? And then also the people who don't see your ads on Meta, how many sales does Meta track from those people? Because, they might still buy because they have touch points on other channels, or they know you from before, they might have purchased anyway. That's exactly what we're trying to answer here. So basically, we're comparing people who see Meta ads, or at least are eligible to see them, versus the people that have not seen your ads. And then we will see, okay, those people have this many sales, and this other group of people that haven't seen your ads have this many sales, or this many sales. So they might actually have similar amounts of sales, which would mean that your meta ads are not very incremental. So you basically evaluate the difference between those 2 groups. And from that, you calculate the incremental ROAS, or the incremental impact your meta ads have. Typically, you see that the group with the ads has slightly or much more sales than the people who didn't see the ads. But then you need, for example, they have 100 more sales, right? And then need to calculate, okay, I invested 10,000 euros into meta ads and I made 100 sales more. So each sale cost me 100 euros. Is that worth it? Is that worth my money? Or if we do the same test on another channel, do we actually see a higher incremental impact? The second way of testing for incrementality is to use incrementality testing tools. Typically, what you do here is that you upload all your sales data per region over a certain period of time, also usually many weeks, months, or even years. And the tool will then identify which regions have historically performed similar. So the tool will see, for example, that if you advertise in all of Europe, the tool will see that, okay, Germany and Spain have historically performed pretty similar in their sales. So the sales either are like the same, sort of. Of course, there's differences from month to month. There's never exactly the same, but they might follow the same trend, or they have different sales levels, but still follow the same trend. And then the thought behind that is, okay, what happens if we exclude Germany from your ads for example, 1 or 2 months? And then we look at how do the sales look then? Do the sales still follow the same trend? Or do the sales actually drop in Germany or rise, which would be weird, but could be possible too. And what you do with that is basically is called a geo experiment, where you withhold a certain region from the ads and you look what kind of effect it has on your actual sales in your backend. And from that, again, you calculate, okay, we invested 10,000 euros into ads on Spain and we saw 100 more sales. Is that worth it? Is the incremental value the channel drives worth it? What's important here is that you look at it over a long enough period of time, because there's fluctuations, there's other factors going in. The sales might actually go up or down randomly. So you need to kind of have long enough time horizon to make that effect disappear or less probable to occur, so that you can have reliable data. And the third way to do incrementality testing is very similar to the first one. You need quite a lot of data for that and quite a big amount of spend. But basically, you're doing that test yourself. So I've actually just set that up for Oatsum. We have excluded some regions from our Google ads. And so we've not run Google ads in those regions. We've looked at kind of the performance of those regions before. I found similarities in performance between different regions. And then I excluded one of those regions from the ads. And then we look at how the effect on the actual sales is. Do we actually see a drop in sales, or do we see similar sales, which would mean that the Google ads are not actually adding a lot of value, not a lot of additional incremental value. So we can evaluate the channel of Google much better than we would have without this test, because a touch point doesn't mean that it's adding value, right? So now we looked at lots of different data sources that you have available to evaluate your performance and give credit to the ad channels for your sales. As I already mentioned a few times throughout the podcast, it's not that you can just rely on one of these data sources, but it's kind of a combination of all of them. And I'm going to tell you what I think is the best way to do it. So I think it's really important that you define one data source as kind of your source of truth. I would recommend that it's a third-party attribution tool, because they're the most advanced and you can use them for the day-to-day optimization as well. The marketing mix model and incrementality tests are also very important factors, but they're not on a day-to-day basis. So they're not really useful for you to, increase spend in one campaign or decrease from another campaign if you see that it's not working. I would add marketing mix model and look at, like longer time periods. For example, each month, I would look at the model and check how much credit the marketing mix model gives to each channel. And based on that, you could, hypothesize a few tests. For example, you see that, okay, the marketing mix model gives more credit to meta ads than we see in our third-party attribution tool. So let's try to increase the spend there and see what happens to our actual sales. That's always the most important metrics, that you look at your actual sales happening. And then also see what the third-party attribution tool and the marketing mix model tell you about that increased investment. So you kind of test your way forward. So marketing mix model, definitely a very important element of your tracking stack. And And I would also add the incrementality tests. So that occasionally, regularly, you do incrementality tests. They can have very different forms. But for example, the geo holdout test that I have described, or the in-platform tests, I think those are pretty straightforward to set up. And they give you additional insights. So none of these tools are the sole truth. Basically, you need to kind of combine the insights together and really come, if the truth is in the middle, you need to come as close as possible to the middle, to the truth. You'll never get there, but you can try to come as close as possible looking at these different data sources. The post-purchase survey, I think, is also super interesting and important to look at. As I mentioned, some of the third-party tools incorporate those, which is great. You can still look at them separately as well as another kind of data source. So these 4 data source types, I would recommend you to set up and use for your evaluation of your channel. And this way you can, test your way forward in which channel, which campaigns you should invest how much, which campaigns are actually working, which campaigns contribute additional sales, incremental sales, and you can build your way forward and improve from there. It's really important, as I mentioned in the beginning, that you understand which of your investments, which of your campaigns is actually the best at driving incremental sales. And you need all of those methods together to find that out. So it's a wrap for this episode. Let me know what you think. I'd really appreciate if you've come this far that you leave a comment. I haven't done this for very long, so I'm still finding my way, and I appreciate every feedback, or if you just give me a thumbs up or something. Would highly appreciate it, or follow, of course, as well. And looking forward to share more with you soon. And until then, have a good one. See ya.